has ever been in Spain, in the Mediterranean coast of Spain? Oh, please, come on, don't be shy. Raise your hands. No more, okay. And how many of you have ever heard about Levantine, rock art of Spain? Less people. Less people. It's relevant for this talk because, well, probably if you are going to Spain next year or sometime in the near future, and you go with me to visit some of these sites, it's very likely that your first question is about how old are these Levantine art, how old is this rock art? And I will have to say, well, I'm not completely sure. We have some theories, we have some problems to define the chronological context of the Levantine art. And that's why I'm involved in the research of the calcium oxalates and how we can use these calcium oxalates to produce a chronological context, more reliable chronological context for the Levantine art of Spain. It's very likely that all of you know more about calcium oxalates than me. So I'm going to focus on the usefulness of this material from an archaeological point of view regarding the subject of this talk. As you know, we have calcium oxalates in many plants. Sometimes you can find in the decoration of your home. And, well, they are everywhere. They are probably in the walls of this hall. They are in the walls of every building that you are going to see in Paris and everywhere. Even if calcium oxalates are produced by our own organism. For example, in the kidney stones, there are a very significant amount of calcium oxalates. And from the archaeological perspective, at least for me, there are several forms of calcium oxalates. Two of them are the more important for us, mainly wegwellite and wedelite, that are different because the presence of a different number of atoms of water included in these molecules, because they are included in many of the oxalate crusts that we can identify in the rock art sites with Levantine art. As an archaeologist, we have a twofold relation with oxalate crusts. In one hand, we have that they are representing a conservation concern because they used to be associated with some kind of lichens, for example, of endolithic lichens that are excreting oxalic acid that are destroying the outer faces of walls. And in consequence, they are destroying the rock art that is preserved in that walls. But on the other hand, when the crust is formed, they are protecting the rock art because they are isolating the rock art from environmental aggressions. They have a very low water solubility, so they are acting like a varnish against many of the aggressions that could be suffering a rock art wall. But for this talk, the important part is that calcium oxalates have a content of around 16% of carbon. And that carbon can be dated, and can be dated if the origin of that carbon is atmospheric. It's not produced by the content of the rock, for example. That's a problem that we have to face because sometimes when we try to date some of these oxalate crusts, the organisms that are producing, that are excreting that oxalate crusts could be feeding from the calcareous substrate where the rock art was made. And in consequence, this is not a good option to get some datings for it. But nowadays, the best hypothesis regarding the origin of the calcium oxalate is that it is produced, naturally produced by bacteria, microbes, by lichens, and they produce that during their metabolic activity. regarding the point that I have explained before, you have to take into account that in some of these rocks we could have suffering, we could be suffering a reservoir effect because of the calcareous nature of the substrate. But for this reason, we have worked mainly in sandstones that are free of any kind of carbonates. So the results of our datings are free of that reservoir effect in many cases. Okay, regarding the problem of the Levantine art chronology, I'm going to try to explain you something that is very complicated, because we have been discussing about this for more than 100 years now. Well, Levantine art could be resumed in something like this. It has it's a rock art style with naturalistic figures, mainly animals and human beings. The animals are treated in a more naturalistic way. Humans are more stylized, and both kind of figures, animals and human beings, interact between them in complex scenes of a narrative nature. For example, hunting scenes, fighting scenes, dancing, etc. The animals that are depicted in these styles are the modern fauna, just the animals that you can find now in these areas. This is a small style. They are figures, the range of the size of the figures is between 10 and 30 centimeters usually. And it was painted mainly in red color, and they are located in open-air rock shelters. For example, like this one. This is the kind of environment where we are going to find this rock art. And you have here some examples, like a pair of stacks in the upper part, or of an archer, a bull, a large bull. Some human figures are men, women, archers, and a large bull again of the area where we are going to see the results of our research for several years up to now. The distribution of this style is in this map. The Levantine rock art are distributed in the White Hatch area. It is connected with other styles. For example, schematic art is distributed in almost the whole of the Iberian Peninsula, even in the southern part of France. And in contrast, Levantine art is also connected with macroschematic art that is located just in a small area of the northern part of Alicante province. For the other styles, we don't have a problem regarding the chronological context of them. For schematic art, we can compare with objects, and we know that it was produced between 5300 to 1800 in calibrated ages before Christ. And regarding the macroschematic art, we have a chronological framework from 5000 to 5200 in calibrated ages before Christ. But that's not the case for Levantine art. For 100 years, archaeologists have been producing different theories with a broad spectra of possibilities, from Paleolithic to the Iron Age. And obviously, not all of them could be right. Nowadays, the hypothesis that is more accepted is that it has a chronology of the Iberian Neolithic. But this is not based in scientific evidences. It's just based in archaeological evidences. Remember that date. The Iberian Neolithic began around 5600 in calibrated ages before Christ. Okay, what are the reasons of this situation? The main reason is that we don't have parallels in the archaeological context. We don't have nothing to compare the imagery of the walls with the objects of the archaeological context. The proposals were based mainly in chronocultural paradigms that compare or decide that every culture has only one kind of art that is produced in a temporal point, and just one, only one. They are mainly based in stylistic criteria that are opposing naturalism versus schematism, and the superimpositions are not concluding. Some of the superimpositions that have been identified all over these years are not conclusive because we are seeing them again, and the order of production is not clear. It's not clear because some of the proposals are not right. It's very easy. And of course we have a problem because we don't have scientific datings, at least up to now. And that's the point where we began to use the calcium oxalate datings. The calcium oxalate datings have been used in many places all around the world from more or less 20 years ago. We identified these coatings in Cueva del Tío Modesto in the year of 2004, and we characterized it using micro-Raman, first removing samples, and then we have using a micro-Raman, a portable micro-Raman, to identify this kind of substance in situ. And we have identified wegolite and wedellite in many of the rock art sites where we are working. This is an image of one of the samples that we removed from some of these places. And here we have some Raman spectra of the species that were in this rock, in this sandstone.
Sorry, you're allowed to remove the samples. What did you do? Oh.
Yes, it's not easy, but we are allowed.
You mean you take a little piece of the pigment, or you?
Sometimes. It's not very usual. And in fact, I'm against the removal of samples from paintings, but in some cases can be used. And in any case, we are not dating, we are not removing the calcium oxalate crusts to produce these datings from the top of the paintings, you know, because we are compared what's the appearance of a crust and the appearance of the crust that is covering the painting, that is overlying the paintings. So we try to avoid any destruction of the rock art as much as we can. In the microstratigraphy of one of these samples, we can see that pigments, in this case hematite, is encapsulated, is included in a kind of a sandwich of oxalates. We have sandwich overlying and underlying the pigment. The first datings were published in 2006, and we worked with Marvin Rowe, with Karen Stillman, with Tom Gilderson. We produced these datings in a complex site that have at least 6 pictorial stages. And the dates that we get from here were around 5,000 in calibrated ages before Christ, at least for 3 of the stages of these rock art sites, mainly the Levantine art. There are 2 scenes of Levantine art, and the zigzag that are in this wall too. Some years later, we keep working on this research line, and we get the date much older, near to 6,000 years old. And of course, this is now a pre-Neolithic age, a pre-Neolithic age in this area. So for the first time, we could say that we have an evidence that this rock art could be older than Neolithic, older than the hypotheses that have been used in the last 20 years. I'm going to show you also another example. In this case, we try to investigate the reliability of the method. So we used this shelter because of the images that there are here. This is schematic art. And this is a kind of imagery that is very diagnostic, because they are eye idols, that's the name of the figures, eye idols, and those eye idols can easily be compared with archaeological objects. So we have a chronological context for this figure in the archaeological well. The ages that we get from the two layers that are related to the paintings produce the minimum and maximum ages where these paintings were made, and you have them here. This is the microstratigraphy of this rock art site, where you can see that we have one layer of oxalate and a second layer of oxalate, and every one of them has been analyzed by Raymond. And well, as I told you, we can compare these figures with the range of ages where these kind of objects were produced in the Iberian Chalcolithic, mainly Chalcolithic period. And this is the time that has been shown in the datings that we have produced with these shelters. So we can suggest that this method is reliable enough to produce a minimum and a maximum age that could help us to identify what's the chronological framework of the paintings that we are trying to date. We have made more or less the same in another site with Levantine art, and the ages that we have gotten that are here are again older than Neolithic. One of them is the minimum, and the other is the maximum. The problem here is that this shelter has a calcareous substrate, so we have to be aware of the problem of the reservoir effect. We have to be aware of this, the organisms that are excreting the oxalic acid could be feeding from the substrate. But at the same time, we have to take into account that could be a rejuvenation process, because we are not sure about the kinetics of the production of these oxalates. So as they are creating again and again all over the period of time, they could be always producing a younger age than probably the cultural event. So, to conclude now, if we put all these ages in a graph, we can identify that we have a cluster with the Levantine art ages that we have up to now, and all of them are in the left part. So they are mainly older than 400 and 4,000 and 1500. And in the right part are only the ages that are connected with the schematic art, that are much younger than Levantine art. So as the concluding remarks, we could say that the method that we have used is reliable to date rock art, that we have the first evidences that suggest that at least a part of the Levantine art were produced in a moment older than Neolithic of the Iberian Peninsula, and that we can differentiate easily between the ages of the Levantine art and the other styles, for example, of schematic art. On the negative side, of course, we need a bigger number of samples, a bigger number of datings to be sure about this. And problems, we don't have almost anything about the microorganism, the individual microorganisms that are or were involved in the production of that calcium oxalate crust. We don't know nothing about the kinetics of the system that is incorporated in the production of these calcium oxalates. And of course, we have to take into account the problem of the influence of the carbonate substrates in the appearance of this crust, because we have many more sites in calcareous substrates than in sandstones, and it could be interesting to produce more dates in these sites. Well, thank you very much to all my friends, and we are a very big team, including biologists, chemists, geologists, archaeologists, of course, and of course to the institutions that have funded our research, and to you for your attention. Thank you very much.